Abraham Lincoln's ascent to the presidency from modest beginnings is evidence of his tenacity, foresight, and strategic genius. After only 2 years of schooling, he became an expert in politics, navigating the intricacies of his era by fusing moral clarity with practical strategy. He was a champion of freedom who made leadership an art of liberation and gave a voice to the voiceless. Lincoln is a timeless symbol of humanity and hope because of his capacity to uplift, foresee, and bring people together. You've studied many American presidents throughout history, so who do you think was the greatest president in American history? The greatest American president was Abraham Lincoln, and Tolstoy reflected on this himself, actually, saying that when he was in the Caucasus, he asked these peasants in the Caucasus who was the greatest man in the world that they had heard of, and they said Abraham Lincoln. And why? Well, because he gave voice to people who had no voice, before he turned politics into an art. This is what Tolstoy recounted, the peasants in the Caucasus telling him, Lincoln made politics more than about power. He made it an art. He made it a source of liberation. And those living even far from the United States could see that, model that inspiration from Lincoln. He was a man who had 2 years of education, yet he mastered the English language, and he used the language to help people imagine a different kind of world. You see, leaders and presidents are at their best when they're doing more than just manipulating institutions and power, when they're helping the people imagine a better world, and he did that as no other president has. And you say he gave voice to those who are voiceless. Who are you talking to about in general? Is this about African Americans, or is this about just the populist in general? Certainly, part of it is about slaves, African Americans, and many immigrants from all parts of Europe and other areas that have come to the United States. But part of it was just for ordinary American citizens. Lincoln was the first president of the Republican Party, which was founded to give voice to poor white men, slaves, and others. Lincoln himself was a poor white man who grew up with little land and no slaves, meaning he had very little. What do you think of his path with only 2 years of education? Is there anything to say about how one can rise from nothing and nurture the ideals that kind of make this country great into something where you can be a leader of this nation to espouse those ideas, to give a voice to the voiceless? Indeed, I believe you hit the nail on the head. He stood for opportunity, and that was the word that mattered to him. Opportunity is the ability to motivate oneself to work hard and receive compensation for your efforts, and it is the foundation of capitalism and the Republican Party of the 19th century. It's not about becoming wealthy, rather it's about being rewarded for your efforts and being encouraged to do better work. Lincoln was always trying, and one of his closest friends, Herndon, claimed that he was the little engine of ambition that couldn't stop. He taught himself to read and become a lawyer, and he had numerous failed businesses before he even got to that point, as well as numerous failed romantic relationships. But he persisted. What American society gave him, and what he wanted American society to offer everyone else, was the chance to keep trying, fail, and then get back up and try again. What do you think was the nature of that ambition? Was there a hunger for power? I think Lincoln had a hunger for success. I think he had a hunger to get out of the poor station he was in. He had a hunger to be someone who had control over his life. Freedom for him did not mean the right to do anything you want to do, but it meant the right to be secure from being dependent upon someone else. So independence, he writes in his letters when he's very young that he hated being dependent on his father. He grew up without a mother. His father was a struggling farmer, and he would write in his letters that his father treated him like a slave on the farm. Some think his hatred of slavery came from that experience. He didn't ever want to have to work for someone again. He wanted to be free and independent, and he wanted again every American. This is the kind of Jeffersonian dream, to be the owner of themselves and the owner of their future. You know, that's a really nice definition of freedom. We often think kind of this very abstract notion of being able to do anything you want, but really it's ultimately breaking yourself free from the constraints, like the very tight dependence on whether it's the institutions or on your family or the expectations or the community or whatever. Be able to realize yourself within the constraints of your own abilities. Since true freedom is probably more akin to creating a character in a video game or something similar, it is still not truly freedom. I agree. I think it's exactly right. I think freedom means at least I get to make decisions that other people don't make, but it doesn't mean I can control outcomes. Even the most powerful free person in the world can't control outcomes. Those choices for me are there something to be said about Lincoln and on the political game front of it, which is he's accomplished some of them. I don't know, but it seems like there's some tricky politics going on. We tend to not think of it in those terms because of the dark aspects of slavery. We tend to think about it in sort of ethical and human terms. But in their time, it was probably as much a game of politics, not just these broad questions of human nature, right? It was a game. So is there something to be said about being a skillful player in the game of politics that you'd take from Lincoln? Absolutely. And Lincoln never read Karl von Clausewitz, the great 19th century German thinker on strategy and politics. But but he embodied the same wisdom, which is that everything is politics. If you want to get anything done, and this includes even relationships, there's a politics to it. What does that mean? It means that you have to persuade, coerce, encourage people to do things they wouldn't otherwise do. And Lincoln was a master at that. He was a master that for two reasons he had learned through his hard life: to read people, to anticipate them, to spend a lot of time listening. One thing I often tell people is the best leaders are the listeners, not the talkers. And then second, Lincoln was very thoughtful and planned every move out. He was thinking three or four moves, maybe five moves down the chessboard, while others were move number one or two. That's fascinating to think about him. That's a really intriguing way to think about it. Just listening to studying. That's how they look at great fighters. For example, in the first few rounds of boxing and mixed martial arts, you're studying your opponent's movement to sort of find the holes.